Good afternoon and welcome to the session How Smart Fulfillment Can Optimize Your ILL Workflows. Before I introduce our speakers today, I wanted to do a couple little housekeeping things. Just an FYI, the session is being recorded and it will be available via the Sketch site after later. Also, the speakers have asked that you save all your questions till the end. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Stacy, Brunner, Suzanne, Butte, Mary Miller, and Jenny Rosenfeld, all from OCLC. And they'll be talking to us today about their new OCLC's new smart fulfillment functionality, which is available through your OCLC WorldShare ILL subscriptions. So without further ado, thank you, ladies.
Thank you, Sheila. And hello, everyone. Welcome to the GALILEO Annual Conference. And thank you for attending our OCLC session, How Smart Fulfillment Can Optimize Your Interlibrary Loan Workflows. I'm happy to be joining you on this not quite as hot as it could be, almost summer Georgia day. I'm Mary Miller, your library services consultant for most of the individual libraries in Georgia. As always, please reach out to me if you need anything in general from OCLC, and I'll be happy to help. Next, we'll be hearing from Suzanne Butte, who is the Director of Strategic Accounts for Georgia. She manages the GALILEO OCLC relationship and is also the contact for GPLS, State Library, UGA Emory, Atlanta University Center, and Georgia Tech. And then after Suzanne, we'll be hearing from two of our resource sharing experts. First, we'll hear from Stacy Brunner, who is a senior product analyst on OCLC's resource sharing team, who works to optimize the discovery and delivery of e-resources in ILL workflows. And then we'll hear from Jenny Rosenfeld, who is a product analyst on OCLC's resource sharing team, who formerly worked on the ILL and implementation teams. She strives to understand the workflow needs of libraries and uses that knowledge to build and enhance features of our resource sharing products. As Sheila mentioned, we will take the questions at the end, but please put them in the chat. And time allowing, we'll answer them. If we don't get to your individual question, we will try to follow up in writing. So look forward to our session. And now, Suzanne, can you take it away?
I sure can, Mary. Hey, thanks so much. And we really want to thank the GALILEO folks for inviting us to speak to all of you today. Thanks to Joy Woodson. She's been great to work with as we put together our presentation and are here with all of you today. So I am just going to say a few words. This is the agenda for today. I'm going to just speak briefly about some of the key benefits of smart fulfillment. And then my colleagues, Stacy and Jenny, will go into all the full feature set of what smart fulfillment includes, as well as a wrap-up slide that provides all the resources that you'll need to get started. And then, as Mary said, we're going to allow some time for questions and answers at the end. So with that, just to give you an idea, the next slide here, Stacy, would be this whole notion of library on demand. So as we all know, users really expect immediate access to information, personalized to their specific needs, and delivered in the way they prefer. Something that, frankly, all of us expect as consumers today. So nothing new in that space. But what OCLC has done is we've really been inspired with recent extensive user research, really that has been realized through all of our products and services. And so Library on Demand really represents a vision for OCLC and for OCLC member libraries to really adapt and grow, and to really provide the ability for patrons and staff to be able to find anything, anytime, anywhere. And so with the next slide, we talk about our product development focus areas as we think about Library on Demand, starting with intuitive discovery. What the idea of intuitive discovery is really to provide an easy to use, predictable ways to conduct and narrow searches so users can get to what they want effortlessly. And then smart fulfillment. Smart fulfillment is really optimized delivery to meet library and user preferences. And this is what we're going to focus obviously on today. And then the idea of personalized experience. So the idea that all transactions come together seamlessly to provide robust options and a complete history for the user. And then we wrap it up with the powerful network. As we know, libraries provide access to materials that are locally curated, authoritative, and credible. So, but with OCLC through WorldCat, our connected services, and really our vast network of member libraries, library users really gain access to a massive global inventory of resources. And then with the next slide, we just mentioned here, the idea of what is smart fulfillment, and you're going to hear a lot about that today. And we do provide a URL here, but just in a nutshell, it's really the idea is we want to provide capabilities that empower libraries to really exceed user expectations. So we know that the expectation is fast, want to be convenient and intuitive, and we think that's really not enough. So OCLC's resource sharing services really go further to offer this idea of library on demand and these new smart fulfillment features. So the idea is a user's request sets a dynamic, as you'll see, a dynamic data-driven process in motion that really will deliver accurate resource options and delivery recommendations in just seconds. And again, this is all for those of you that have a WorldShare ILL subscription, as well as Iliad and Tapasa. All of these features that we're going to talk about today come with those subscriptions. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation, I believe it's over to Stacy, who will kick it off.
Sure, thanks, Suzanne.
Sure.
All right, so these smart fulfillment benefits are the result of ongoing feature enhancements across OCLC resource sharing services, such as WorldShare Interlibrary Loan, Tapasa, and Iliad. If you use these services, some of these features are already available to you at no additional cost. If you've attended our other presentations in the past year, you heard us talk about smart fulfillment. Last year, we shared about a pilot with several libraries who helped us to define and test new features like real-time availability and smart lender strings. Many smart fulfillment features have been released, and we have more in the works. So Jenny and I today want to share more about how and why you should be taking advantage of these features. We have some information about your configuration and statistics and how you're doing now, and where some tuning will make fulfillment smarter. Most libraries today are Iliad. Many of you are Iliad, so we'll share about how Iliad and WorldShare ILL can work together. And of course, the WorldShare ILL and Tapasa libraries in the group can access smart fulfillment directly. So it's not necessarily helpful to see the release of features on our timeline. So let's talk about the comings and goings of requests and materials in your own library and where smart fulfillment helps out. So starting on the requesting side, you would use Automated Request Manager to ensure that patrons get requests filled quickly. Around here, we call Automated Request Manager ARM. It really is like having a helping hand in processing requests. ARM can lighten your mental load at work by applying constant data categorically to requests. You order your favorite lenders into a few groups, prioritize them into a custom holdings path, and ARM will build you a lender string. ARM was formerly known as Direct Request. It was relaunched in March of 2020 with a whole new interface that's much simpler to understand and to configure, as well as some new capabilities. So this is the interface for ARM. It was redesigned to help you understand what happens for every request, like matching to a WorldCat record in order to locate holdings and checking against your own local holdings. You can choose the match order for automations by setting the priority. Anyone on your staff can read the details of the automations to understand how incoming requests are being handled. When you make changes to automations, it takes effect immediately. This makes it easy to dip your toes into the automation waters. When you start, you configure automations to assign constant data and build a lender string. You can review all of the work that ARM does on your requests before sending those off to lenders. Then, once you've gotten comfortable with what's going on and you've fine-tuned your automations, you can switch the automation to send to lenders in order to get the most from automation, to get those requests out the door very quickly. The other thing to mention, this is about as complicated as it gets for borrowing automation. Most libraries only need 2 automations, one for copies and one for loans. So now a little more about those lender strings. Why do we call them smart lender strings? Well, it's because ARM has access to more data than your staff interfaces, like deflections and license terms. It can evaluate the capacity of hundreds of potential lenders to fill each request. And ultimately, it sorts the lender string based on the lender's turnaround time and available bandwidth to fill requests. You aren't going to believe the difference in turnaround time between requests processed manually and those with strings built by automation. And you'll see some examples of that in a few minutes. In ILLIAD and WorldShare ILL interfaces, even if the holdings page showed you all of the information, it would be really time consuming and really kind of tedious to take in all of those details and handcraft your own lender string. So now I'll hand off to Jenny, who will share how the Galileo libraries are currently using automation, as well as how ILLIAD can connect to ARM.
Thanks, Stacy. So it's really easy for us to tell you that smart lender strings and automation really make a big difference in terms of what we see across our system with turnaround time. But I think when we're talking to groups like yours, it can make a bigger impact to look at what's happening just in your group of libraries. So since Galileo comprises so many library groups and types of libraries in the state of Georgia, we decided to look at all libraries across the state when putting together these statistics. So we're looking at borrowing requests from the beginning of 2020 until now. There are 6 Georgia libraries who have used Automated Request Manager, or ARM, to send out at least one request unmediated to lenders. And you'll see the list of ARM users here, and it's listed in order of how many requests each sent out unmediated. So the heaviest users of automation are first here. We'd really love to see this number grow quite a bit. And maybe once you hear more about the results that you can get with ARM, we'll have some new fans of automation after today. When I looked at the borrowing turnaround time for requests that were sent out via automation, so those were the ones that had the smart lender strings that Stacy was talking about, built by ARM, compared to the turnaround time of requests that had staff building the lender string, I really wasn't surprised to see that the automated requests did better. And in the case of requests from libraries in Georgia for copies, the difference was pretty dramatic, as you can see. So some definitions here. We define borrowing turnaround time as the time between when requests are first sent out to lenders to when the request is marked received by the borrower. So if you think about that, that time frame doesn't even take into account the additional time savings of automated requests that get immediately sent to lenders when the patron submits them. Those requests don't sit in a queue waiting for staff to look at them like the manual requests do. And so this 26-hour time difference that we see between automated requests and manual requests reflects purely the better performance of smart lender strings over lender strings that are constructed by ILL staff. Requests got sent to faster libraries first. They avoided libraries who would deflect or who didn't hold the requested volume or issue. And they had licenses prohibiting resource sharing on the requested title. So the smart lender strings did all of that. So Stacy showed how easy the config is to get set up to use Automated Request Manager on the OCLC side. But since some of your libraries use ILLIAD, You'll also need to take the additional step of getting requests from ILLiad to flow into ARM. And it's actually pretty easy to do that. And our friends at Atlas, we work together with them to work through this part and show you how the setup works. So the first step is simply to make sure you have your customization manager set to enable processing of requests in ARM. In ILLiad, ARM is still referred to as direct request, but it is actually ARM. And so for this initial step, you just make sure that you have direct request enabled set to yes under your borrowing settings. You'll also want to enable the awaiting direct request sending custom queue, which is where requests leave ILLiad and go to OCLC ARM. You can add a record in your custom queues for awaiting direct request sending. Make sure it's available for borrowing as the process type. So while those first two steps are really all you'll need to manually route requests from ILLiad into ARM, if you want to take full advantage of the speedier processing, you will probably want to automate that routing of requests from ILLiad into ARM. And to do that, you'll need some routing rules, which if you use ILLiad, you're probably familiar with already. Since automation only works on requests where there is an ISSN, an ISBN, or an OCLC number, you can set up some routing rules that grab any requests with at least one of those values and automatically route them to automation. When you set up those rules, make sure you give that routing rule number a low value to allow it to run before all others. And next, I've got a few examples of routing rules that will get you started. Don't worry about furiously writing them down. I know the syntax of routing rules can get tricky. We will definitely share these slides with you after the session. The first example is one for a basic loan routing rule. You can see in the description here that this will look for requests that have a request type of loan and that have an ISBN and where no lending string has already been built. Those requests will be sent directly to awaiting direct request sending, where they'll be processed by the automated request manager within a minute or two. Depending on where your patrons submit their requests from, hopefully they submit them via open URL from your databases or WorldCat Discovery or other discovery systems, those requests might also contain an OCLC number. So if you use this routing rule, it will send all loan requests to ARM where there is either an ISBN or an OCLC number. And for articles, it's pretty similar. You can set up a similar routing rule. Here, you're routing requests with a request type of article where there is either an ISSN or an OCLC number to automation at OCLC. And once you have these configurations in place on the ILLiad side, you're really ready to go with ARM. And also on the Atlas documentation site for ILLiad, they've added a few more advanced routing rules to filter requests that go to ARM. So if you want to do things like send everything to OCLC ARM, unless a patron's put a note in it, because then you might want to stop the request and look at it to make sure it doesn't require special processing. And since ILLiad keeps the patron data separate from what it sends into OCLC, you would set up the routing rule on the ILLiad side for that. And Atlas has provided some really great examples of how to set additional routing rules like that up. So Stacy talked about the benefits that come with using smart lender strings that were built in automation, most notably turnaround time. We've overall seen about a 50% increase in speed for borrowing turnaround time for copies since we started rolling out these new features in automation, like the turnaround time sorted lender string and the additional checking features that the lender string that gets built in automation has. We really wanted to see up close, though, what happens to requests that go through automation and get those smart lender strings built, and how that compares to requests where ILL staff do every step manually. So what I want to do next is take you through some actual requests from actual libraries. So none of this is test data. These are real libraries that are requesting from each other on the network. Let's look at the profile of Borrowing Library 1. This is a library that uses automation in Automated Request Manager, and that automation applies constant data and sends copy requests to lenders in a custom holdings path that they specify. So what does that mean? That means that the request gets sent to lenders in order of turnaround time. It gets the load balancing situation taken care of. So if a lender has too many requests in their string, it won't send to that lender. It also checks licenses, it checks holdings, it checks date coverage for serials. All of those things are checked as part of the smart lender string. And an important note, when we talk about automation building the lender string, we really are talking about just that automation that's set up in Automated Request Manager. We get questions about this sometimes. Sometimes library staff think that when they filter that list of holding libraries in the staff interface by their selected custom holdings path or by a profile group, that's actually not automation in the way that we're talking about here. Automation isn't building that lender string. That's simply the system randomizing some symbols. You're not getting the smart lender string with that. So you would need to do that using Automated Request Manager. So sorry, Stacy, I threw you off on the slides there. So that's borrowing library 1. Borrowing library 2, let's contrast this library. This library doesn't use ARM at all. Staff get requests in from patrons in a review file or via email, or they type in requests manually on behalf of their users. Then they construct the lender string themselves and apply their own constant data and send it off to lenders manually. What happened with requests from these two libraries? So in about the last month, these two libraries both happened to request a copy from an article from the journal Developmental Psychology. Here we can see what happened to those requests time-wise. So we can see that library 1, that's the one using automation, was able to get this request filled in 15 minutes. And that's actually from the time the patron submitted it until the patron had the item in their hands. The smart lender string built was really successful because the first lender in the system built lender string filled the request, and they did it really, really quickly. You can look at library number 2 as a contrast, who's using no automation. They had ILL staff perform every step manually. This library applied constant data and chose their own lender string. And actually that human intervention ended up with a much slower result. It took until the 7th lender in the string before the request was filled. And it took over 45 hours for that patron to get their request. We can look more closely at why those requests had such different fates. So the first library on the left here had a patron submit a request from the library's discovery service. It doesn't matter what discovery service it is, on a Friday afternoon at 1:53 p.m. Because automation was set up in ARM, this request had constant data applied to the library specifications. A lender string was constructed and the request was sent out to lenders. And that all happened in the same minute. And because the lender string was built in automation, it was a smart lender string where lenders were sorted by turnaround time. Additionally, that smart lender string checked for deflections and it removed 3 lenders who would have deflected. It also made sure the request was not sent to any libraries who had local holdings records or WorldCat knowledge base holdings that indicated they didn't have the requested date. The first library assigned filled the request 14 minutes later at 2:07 p.m. Now, library 1 also uses Iliad with trusted senders, so their system automatically received the request and sent it to the patron a minute after that. How long did it take from the time the patron placed the request until they had the document delivered electronically? That only took 15 minutes. That is pretty impressive. As an aside, this feature that automatically receives copy requests that are shipped electronically is available in both Tapasa and Iliad. But if you use WorldShare ILL, you can turn on a staff notification email in service configuration. It's under interlibrary loan options. And that email will send up to 5 staff members a brief message whenever a copy request gets filled via article exchange. And that email includes a link directly to the request in the staff interface so that you can quickly process it and send it to your patron. So that can help give you that same sort of immediate reception feature for electronically received requests. Let's look at library 2 on the right. Why were they so much slower? So they had a patron request an article, but because their staff had to manually type in the request, we don't know if the patron submitted it in email or via an online form, or if they were at the reference desk, and we don't know how long before the library processed the request that happened either. But regardless, the request was manually sent out to lenders by library 2's ILL staff on a Tuesday afternoon at 2:28 p.m. They built that lender string by hand, so it didn't get a smart lender string. Deflections and holdings were not automatically checked. lenders were not sorted by turnaround time. Not surprisingly, the request had to go deeper into the lender string before it was filled, to the 7th lender in this case. So what happened at each of those lenders? The first lender deflected. The second lender said no, lacking, but the request sat with them for 2.5 hours before they said that. The 3rd through 5th lenders all said no as well, and that took nearly 2 days of time cumulatively. The request sat with each lender, waited for them to look at it, and they all said no eventually. That 6th lender then deflected the request. And finally, the 7th lender shipped the request 33 minutes after it was assigned to them on a Thursday morning at 11:44 a.m. Library 2's staff marked that electronically sent article received 12 minutes later and then sent it to their patron. This patron had to wait almost 2 days for their request. If automation had built that lender string, it may very well have sorted the lender string to send to the 7th lender first, because that 7th lender was really fast. They only needed 33 minutes to fill the request, and they clearly had the needed volume issue. An important note about this, these figures are not outliers. We have even faster requests in automation than this one filled in 15 minutes. And the 45 hours for requests sent out manually is close to the system average for copy requests among libraries using no automation. And in fact, as you just saw a few slides ago, that 45 hours for copy requests that are sent out unmediated is exactly equal to the average we see among Georgia libraries for copy requests that don't use automation. So those are copies, but what about loans? We've talked a lot about copies. So here is automation. How is automation doing with loans? These are 2 loan requests for the same DVD, a Christmas DVD. We can think about cooler weather that doesn't have cicadas in it right now as we look at this example. So these are 2 different libraries from the first example that we had, but their profiles are pretty similar in that the first one uses automation to send automatically to lenders, and library 2 doesn't use automation at all. So interesting to note here about these examples, both of these requests for this DVD were submitted by the patron when the library was clearly closed. But for the library using automation, that wasn't a problem because automation processed the request immediately, applied the constant data, updated bibliographic information, and sent the request to lenders within 1 minute of the patron submitting it. The second library, though, who wasn't using automation, had to wait until library staff came in, reviewed the request, and manually processed it. Because that happened over the holidays, that process took 16 days. Library 1 had automation build them a smart lender string, and the 3rd lender in that string filled the request the same day that the patron submitted it, later in the afternoon. Of course, it took a few days for shipping, but the borrowing library had the item in hand for the patron just 4 days later. Now, library 2 manually constructed their own lender string. It took 5 lenders until 1 could fill the request. But that process of finding a lender took 11 days because the lender string wasn't optimized. Shipping also took longer here. It took 16 days. Overall, it took library 2 42 days to get this request for their patron. What if they had used smart lender strings? Why was that so much faster? Let's see what happens on the loan side here. So both of these libraries, interestingly enough, had patrons submit the request themselves, in this case, for both of them from First Search. Because library 1 had automation in place that immediately processed that request and sent it to lenders, it was processed immediately and had a smart lender string built. Before constructing the lender string, automation determined that 4 libraries in the specified custom holdings path who held that item would deflect the request. So they were just omitted from the lender string. The first lender couldn't supply because the item was checked out, but because the lender string was sorted by turnaround time, this first lender, who is fast to say yes and ship items, they were also fast to say no when they couldn't supply. The second lender had real-time availability configured. So the system immediately responded with an automatic no without even putting the request in that lender's queue. The request then reached the third lender, who was able to supply the item, and they marked it shipped the same afternoon. Because library 1 also has really well-constructed custom holdings paths for loan requests, they prioritized lenders that were located nearby geographically in the first groups in their path. So that means that the request went first to libraries nearby. libraries whose shipping time would be faster. So that's pretty important to do when you're constructing custom holdings paths for loan requests for physical items, but it's not really important for copies, because for copies, you just want to prioritize fast suppliers. And since they're shipped electronically, those suppliers could be located anywhere in the world on our network. Well, let's look at library 2 on the right here. It needed 5 lenders to get the item. The first 2 lenders deflected, but the third selected lender allowed that request to age without responding to it. So that really slowed down the request a lot. Smart lender strings built in automation will avoid lenders like that, lenders who just let requests age. The 4th lender said no, and the 5th lender shipped the item. But that process of submitting to lenders to having the item shipped took 11 days. Shipping took longer too, because the lending library that supplied the request wasn't geographically close by. So shipping took 16 days here. I'll hand it back over to Stacy to talk about putting all these features together.
Thanks, Jenny. So we've had feedback from libraries who shared that their patrons noticed the fast turnaround times and sent them emails of thanks and praise. It's well worth the small investment in time to set up smart fulfillment through automation. But now let's talk about smart fulfillment from your perspective as a supplier. Our approach here is to apply automation to requests that you definitely won't be able to fill. And for requests that you can fill, providing information that allows you to prioritize and manage incoming requests. And remember that I said a smart lender string is ordered by turnaround time. As you become more efficient at supplying, your symbol moves toward the beginning of the strings, so you get the first shot at requests that you have the capability to fill. Real-time availability is the feature that helps to streamline the requests that you will fill any given day. And I do mean will fill. You're going to say no to many fewer requests. Real-time availability connects WorldShare ILL to your library's local catalog to determine if a requested item is available. When your library becomes the current lender in the string, the system checks the item status in your local system. If the item's unavailable, the request moves to the next lender in the string. If the item is available, or it's not found, or any status that doesn't readily map to unavailable, the request will be put in the lending can you supply queue, or your Iliad connection manager will pick it up and route it accordingly. This does require configuration. This is configuration that OCLC will do for you for real-time availability, but you first need to provide us with some information about your library by completing a questionnaire. That questionnaire asks for information like your library's Z3950 server, for connecting, searching, the database name, structure of your MARC records, especially around the OCLC number, and a few items in different statuses so that we can verify the configuration. At the bottom here, you see an example of this feature in action, and you saw it in Jenny's examples as well. This request was sent to 4 lenders. The item was checked out at the first lender's library, so the system immediately replied no, and the request moved on. The second library was deflecting requests of this format type, so the request immediately moved to the third library. The third library had real-time availability, and the item was checked out, so the system immediately replied no and moved the request on. So in just 6 seconds, the request got to the supplier who could supply it. It didn't spend any time waiting in a lending queue for ILL staff to check the item's shelf status at those first 3 libraries just to have to say no. So this feature became available to all OCLC subscribers after a long pilot where we tested it out and tweaked some things and made sure that it would work just so. And it became available to everyone back with our April release. So there's no turning it on for your library staff. You just have to let us know via the survey that you'd like it configured, and we'll get that set up for you. So what about your libraries? Only 12 of your libraries are configured right now. And among all of your libraries from January to April, there were 5,136 requests marked in use on loan. These are requests that could be fast-tracked by real-time availability. We'd be happy to set this up for anyone who's interested. We only require that you have a Z3950 server that we can connect to and check. So to see where you're at now and track improvements, check your OCLC usage statistics. In the lender reasons for no report, you'll see auto no requests appear as no system checked availability. So now putting it all together, this is your vibe when you've tuned both borrowing and lending for smart fulfillment. Remember, you use Automated Request Manager to build smart lender strings to get faster turnaround time for borrowing. And as a lender, you get set up for real-time availability to filter off loan requests for items that are not currently available. Keeping your OCLC holdings up to date in WorldCat and the OCLC knowledge base provides decision optimization in ILLIAD, WorldShare ILL, and Tapasa that make you more efficient. And I mentioned before about keeping an eye on statistics. Let me share a new detail with the borrowing and lending activity overview reports. It's a mouthful. The borrowing and lending activity overview reports now show you the turnaround time in 3 parts. The overall for all filled requests, which actually doesn't tend to be that useful because there's such a big difference between copies and loans. But we also show individually for your turnaround time for copies and for loans. So in this example, it shows that copy requests hardly rest in the queue at all. For lending, you're averaging about 14 hours turnaround time. And the loans aren't shabby either, at less than 2 days from landing in the queue until they're waving goodbye and shipping. And here on the borrowing report, we see that copy requests on average are filled in less than 2 days, and loan requests are filled in about 15 days. So knowing your borrowing turnaround time helps you to set goals and to look for those outliers. It's key to making decisions about custom holdings groups, automation, and other policies and processes. And now I will go back to Jenny with one last exciting development to come out of Smart Fulfillment.
So this is the Express program. Maybe some of you have heard about it because in fact, there are 26 Georgia libraries who are currently qualified and in the Express group. So what is it? It is an exclusive group of libraries who have committed to having fast turnaround times. In fact, the only libraries who were invited got an invite because their turnaround time for copy requests was 18 hours or less. And it was consistently that over at least 2 of 3 months that we looked at in review. So this means that these libraries have access to other super fast libraries. These libraries make up about the 10% fastest libraries on the network. There are about 1,000 libraries in the Express program, and they have access to requesting from each other. This is working really well. It helps libraries request items for their patrons digitally, quicker, and provide that really fast turnaround time that their users are looking for. Your library may achieve an invite as well if you are able to get your turnaround time to 18 hours or less. And that's something that we regularly review in our statistics, and we'll be adding more libraries in August. Let's see what this group is actually doing though. How is it performing? So if you are able to achieve this improved lending turnaround time for copy requests, that is when you will get your invitation. And we are updating the list about 3 times a year now. So like I said, August will be the next time, and then I think we'll do one around the beginning of the year, and then again in May. So it gives libraries a chance to, if they didn't initially make that, it gives you something to work towards. The group gets invited because they have turnaround time for copy requests of 18 hours or less, but the group average is actually even better than that, as you can see on this slide. So February 2021 was the first full month of the Express program, and the group filled requests from other Express libraries in an average of 10.65 hours, and they filled over 34,000 requests. That is a lot of requests filled in the group. In March, we got even better. Over 39,000 requests were filled in an average of only 9.79 hours. The Express program really rewards your library for great lending performance by giving you access to other fast lenders that you can request from them and achieve fast turnaround time for your borrowing requests. And you can see our time stayed pretty consistent in April and in May as well, with just over 10 hours turnaround time. So we're really excited about this development. We've heard from libraries, like Stacy mentioned, who are getting accolades from their own users saying, wow, I'm getting things super quickly. You know, you guys are doing a great job. And we love seeing all the libraries posting on social media their stories of successful interactions with their patrons due to their participation in Express.
Yeah, that's true. And we didn't even mention about the badge that folks have been sharing. We have if you're in Express, you get access to a digital badge that you can put in social media or on your library website. All right, so to wrap up here, the short URL at the top, the oc.lc/sf get started, will provide you with basic resources and links for getting started with smart fulfillment features that we've discussed today. For real-time availability, we'll collect a little bit of information about your Z server and sample items, as I mentioned, and we'll handle the configuration from there. And then if you can, you can use the information from this, this slide presentation, which we'll share, and set up at least one automation for copies and one for loans. That is all you need to do to get started with automation. And then as you reap the rewards of those improvements and put a keen eye towards your lending processing of copy requests, you may be able to receive an invitation to Express. And so, and as Jenny pointed out, many of you are already in Express doing amazing work there. So it's really exciting to see. With that, we will take questions.
So we do not have any questions in the chat yet, but if anyone has questions to ask, please feel free to go ahead and put those in the chat for us to answer.
We can clarify that all of these features that we talked about today are available with your existing subscriptions. So you don't need to purchase any add-ons or learn new systems. You can use these features in the system that you're already familiar with today.
Got a comment from Adam Solomon. Great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Yes, it is for all WorldShare subscribers. So WorldShare ILL, if that's all you have access to, it's available for WorldShare ILL, AnyTopasa, and Iliad. And I think it's kind of an exciting time to put new eyes on your ILL operation, you know, post-COVID, when everything is disrupted and changed, and we're all coming back different. And then there are new features to take advantage of as well. So it can be kind of exciting.
So we have a question from Sarah Ziegler. Could you give the best contact information to schedule a consultation for using automation?
Probably email us at OCLC resource sharing at oclc.org. Is that right, Jenny?
Yes, that's right.
I usually see it in writing. Makes more sense. Can you tell us any more about what kind of consultation you're looking for? I believe in the smart fulfillment, the getting started information, those a public library with WorldShare ILL. Okay. Yeah, we can type that address in. The getting started document, though, I would certainly start there. There's some really good resources, and what I like about that is that it points to our documentation, and also some workshops that Jenny and Heather Black from Iliad did, or from Atlas, that they put together, that I think, based on how you learn best, or just seeing it in different formats and in different ways of presenting, I think it makes a lot of sense. And then certainly if you go through the documentation or you review things and you still have an outstanding concern or problem or question, it helps us to hear from you and to know where we can fill those gaps with information. So yeah, so use the resources, but we're happy to take questions as well.
Yeah, and I was thinking, Stacy, with GPLS, since Sarah's with the public library, we could perhaps, Sarah, work with the folks at GPLS. I'm thinking like Elaine Hardy and perhaps others to do something specific for the publics.
Oh yeah.
So that might be something we might want to entertain at some point.
And we do have a webinar happening, forget the date of it, the 29th. And there's a public library sharing there about how they've used automation. So you might look into attending that webinar. That's available. You find information about that in the community center on the events page. But we have an Iliad, a TAPASA, and a WorldShare ILL library talking about how they've made use of the smart fulfillment features.
I think the public library's patrons request via first search, and those get immediately processed by automated request manager. But if that's not something that you do or are willing to do, there's actually a way to manually send requests to automation from the staff interface. If you're using WorldShare ILL, where it says send requests to lenders, there's a drop down there, and underneath it says send request to automation. So that would then have automation process it, build you the smart lender string, and send out if that's how you had it set up. So there are different ways that you can use automation.
Comment from Sarah again. We don't use first search at this time. It's great to know that we could still use automation. Do we have any other questions?
Thank you. I mean, we really appreciate this opportunity. I wish you guys luck in your conference this week. And I know Stacy, Jenny, thank you as always. Great job, great presentation. I know we covered a lot of information, so we're happy to help address any future questions that you have directly, or we can do it through GPLS or Galileo. So whichever way works best.
All right, well, thanks to our great speakers. Just a note that the recording will be available later, and I want to thank all of you for joining us. Have an excellent afternoon.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone.